Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Man, it's been a busy weekend. I went to work at the Aztec Gun Show for my friend at Go Rogue. He owns it. Lance did some great stuff this weekend. It was kind of a slow show because the guys in northwest New Mexico figured they would throw a gun auction at the same time that the gun show is going. They moved the gun auction to kind of hose the guys at the gun show. Now, gun shows I've noticed are, well, still boomer FUD kind of things, but there's a lot of people that go there to see what it is. It's a great place to meet people in the 2A in your community and kind of commune with each other. It was cool seeing lots of people with kids. I know the left right now would be demonizing that we're grooming kids to be active in the 2A community, but it was a great way to see kids get introduced into the 2A. I got to see some of them and talk to them a little bit about the ammunition that Go Rogue makes. But Friday, we had some stuff happen that we need to talk about. The first one is the not the mass shooting. It was the actual chokeout of someone on the subway in New York. Now, this man had something like 42 or 62 different counts against him for different times and different crimes. And a Marine bravely stood up and took the man down when he started not hitting on, but actually physically assaulting someone. And there were other two passengers that actually continued to help him. Now, unfortunately, this man died because he was choked out, and the choke was lethal. Now, New York has a tendency to demonize anyone that is defending themselves. So I don't hold a lot of hope that this man gets off on his charges. But this highlights and goes into that same thing I was talking about on my last video podcast or video blog that I showed this off on, where it's talking about self-defense is for everyone. And it is. So in the aftermath of that, BLM started rioting, and they're trying to say that this man murdered someone. Now, AOC has also come out and said that Andrea Ocasio-Cortez, if you really want to know her name, but AOC came out and said this man was murdered. He wasn't. The video that you actually see him trying to be the Marine himself, trying to just subdue the guy, just to stop him. Now, the man struggles back and fights back, and he had a lot of mental issues according to what the documentation is showing now. But it highlights what I would say is self-defense is for everyone. You know, Jack Posobiec has been showing off videos from Poland's subway. And the subway in Poland, people are just doing their thing. They're not being turds like they are in America. And this speaks a lot to mental health and the mental component of what's going on. You know, the same time that this happened, I think it was Saturday when I was at the gun show, there was another shooting. This was in Allen, Texas, or Dallas Mall. And he shot 8 people. Now, immediately the media came out and said this man was a white nationalist. But later on, you find out he's a Hispanic man with a very Hispanic name that perpetrated this crime. Now, this man used an AR-15. And I know that because I found videos from Mr. Guns and Gear specifically where the guy was aired out. And it was the aftermath of where he was aired out. You can see him subdued after law enforcement engaged this man. Now, we've had 2 incidents at the mall in I live in northwest New Mexico. We're not really crime-ridden, or we never have been up until recently. But there's been 2 different sets of shootings there. One killed 2 people, what it looks like now. And then right after that, there was another one that was involved where guys were trying to steal stuff out of cars and got caught. Now, I don't know for sure that was a shooting, but they were stealing guns out of cars. This is why I tell all you boomer guys that, a truck gun is a bad plan unless you have it locked up in some sort of safe device to where they can't get to it. Your personal defense gun should be on you. Speaking of your personal gun being on you, Matt Gaetz, immediately after the BLM riots came out or the protesters, I should say, came out. Well, they're rioters. I'm not going to call them protesters. That's giving into their language. But the rioters showed up in New York to protest and riot and basically disrupt things. saying that this man was killed, right, and that you're not legally able to defend yourself, which is absolutely wrong. It's counterintuitive to everything that the United States stands for. Matt Gaetz came out with a bill, and he introduced it, and I don't think it has a chance of passing, but it's an interesting one. And what it is it's giving stand your ground to everyone in the United States. Now, this should be a thing. Now, if you don't know what stand your ground means, is most states that most liberal states, or leftist states, I should say, have something called duty to retreat. That means you have to do everything in your power before you can use force to defend yourself. So they put the onus on defense on the victim. So the victim is not allowed to defend themselves even though they're being attacked, even though they're being assaulted, even though their property is being taken. You have to defend your rights or have to evade the attacker before you fight back. Now, what Matt Gaetz' bill would do is actually come forward and tell you you're okay to defend yourself at any given time. This is the one that I think it was in Florida. The man had pulled a gun and killed a young black man, it turns out. And there was a lot of stink that went around with it. I think his name is George Hernandez or George Fernandez or something like that. Anyway, I should do more research on that if I wanted to do more talking about it, but I don't, because that man turns out was a turd and should be forgotten in the 2A community. But standing your ground is very fundamental to the United States. You should be able to defend yourself. It is not on it's not a place that the American government should be able to tell you're a victim. You just take it. That's not how our country has ever worked. That's not how it ever will work. If we allow it to get to that point, we've went too far. And in a lot of leftist strongholds, that's the case. I'm worried about New Mexico becoming that kind of leftist stronghold because there's new campaign footage of Martin Heinrich, who's trying to get reelected in 2024, and he's probably one of the worst guys for being a turncoat. He's done some things that are great for veterans in New Mexico, but he's also done a lot against the 2A in New Mexico. Him and Ben Ray Lujan have no business being in political power. Neither does Michelle Lujan Grisham. But here's where we're at. The idea here is that self-defense is universal. This isn't something... I noticed this at the gun show. There was a lot of boomer talk about, there was a guy sitting next to me at a political table, and he was talking to people as they passed, and I had to listen to it quite a bit, along with a gentleman that told me all the great intricacies about moose hunting, and how to get a guide and how to get to BC to hunt moose. But this guy had this one lady who just went off on how great Trump was. And while I am not a Trump supporter, I understand the man has and it does do some things right. But you also have to understand and have to come to terms with Trump was the first one in 3 presidents that got gun control enacted. He's the one that gave the power. The current pistol brace rule we're fighting right now is because of what Trump did with the bump stock rules. Okay, he engaged the ATF in a way for them to arbitrarily change their rules. Now, why I'm bringing up this boomer lady is she was talking about how great Trump was and how there's not anything they can do about this. And that's why we're at right now. Why we're in the situation we're in right now is because of boomers. I'm going to be blunt right there. Boomers, especially in the 2A community, tend to be of the volition that back the blue no matter who. And when you do that, you're negating something that's very core to our core tenet. Now, I understand law enforcement is usually on the right. We're trying to help. They're trying to help us. But you have to realize who's coming for your guns. These two ideas that, out of my cold dead hands that comes from the boomer ideology and back the blue, bump. Because what will happen is cops will come for your firearms. And if you don't believe that, look what happened during the COVID stuff. I bring this stuff all the time up because that's when my great awakening from being a total status actually happened. You know, I saw on one of my Facebook feeds a memory from myself where 10 years ago today, I was advocating for a mill bill to be passed in Aztec, New Mexico, because that helps with school funding. And while I am thinking about how statist I was back then to actually want to vote for or advocate for people to vote for tax increases. You know, I'm a huge fan of Eric July. I've mentioned that many times, and Eric tells you all the time that the state is based on theft. Well, taxation is theft, and that is exactly what they're doing. And in this day and age, when you see that they're working on against us in every way, I mentioned this in the last video podcast where I talked about the banks failing, and we're seeing inflation spike, and now we're worried about bank failures in the United States. You know, that is directly related to how the government conducts business, and that needs to be watched and taken care of. Now, you can vote your way into communism, but you can't vote your way out of communism. You're going to have to fight your way out of it. And with the leftists and the young kids right now, where they're idolizing these ideas and concepts that Marxism and socialism is a great idea, we need to be more active. Most of us Generation Xers, who usually want to be left alone and don't want to end up in the political arena, we need to stand up and start saying no. And you're seeing that in our kids. Some of our alphas, Generation Alpha, or Generation Z as they're called, and the millennials, which are some of the boomer kids and some of our kids, they're more conservative than we are. And we need to kind of realize that it's time to have a rational conversation. I mentioned this before, that you cannot have 3 years of lockdown without some sort of repercussions, and I believe we're seeing those repercussions on the street right now. And I believe law enforcement is seeing that. You know, the crime rates in every area has spiked as it's kind of proven that it's George Soros-backed attorneys, district attorneys, that are letting people back on the streets to perpetrate these crimes. You know, you can't have someone that has 42 different times that they've had interactions with the law, where the law could have had a chance to stop this person from basically assaulting someone else and ended up dying because of that. You know, on Timcast, I'm a fan of Timcast too. Timcast had a really big leftist on, and he basically got owned about a lot of things. I'm not going to cover that and talk about that. There's enough people talking about it on Twitter and in the social media spaces. But something this man brought up was that he's diametrically opposed to self-defense. And you cannot be that way as an American citizen. This man was a Canadian, so it makes sense. There's a lot of Canadians who are ultimate statists. There's a few that are very based as hell. Check out Lauren Southern. She's got a new documentary coming out on Timcast that is about the Second Amendment and the infringement. It's actually called Infringed. But that interaction, to get back to that interaction with that lady, I didn't interact with her myself because there was no point. She was convinced that there was only one thing they could do, and that was to try to vote for these people that seemed to turncoat. And I was very tempted to, but as I was working this booth, I didn't want to leave or start a discussion that would have taken me away from what I had signed on to do for Lance. I'm there to rep his ammo because I believe in it. But it's time that people start standing up and saying, look, guys, you guys are thinking of things about rational thought and rational discussion and debate, where the left no longer does that. They spout out talking points, and that's all they care about. There is no reasoning with people that only spout out talking points because they know nothing about their own discussions. That's where I was headed with that Timcast thing. Those guys, that guy went on Timcast, and he wasn't able to debate head-to-head, and he got owned. And that's what would happen with a leftist. But they're still going to keep those ideology points that they have because that's all they have. They have nothing else in their mind but this is bad. The left thinks now, you want good thing's bad. That's it. That's all it is. So self-defense is universal. The 2A is universal for American citizens. The reason why it is to stand up to tyranny. And man, it is raining tyranny everywhere. The chances you give up any of your freedoms means that the chance for tyranny to spike and go up are even more infinite. We need to stop this now. We need to back people like Matt Gaetz. Now, Matt Gaetz, some people like, some people don't. But the fact of the matter is, he's the only man right now that I see, him and Thomas Massie and Ron Paul that are in, or Rand Paul, not Ron Paul. Ron Paul, I wish he was still in there, but he's not. Rand Paul, who actually get up and say, hey, this is bullcrap. You know, Jim Jordan's trying. Jim Jordan's rounding about there. He should have been the Speaker of the House, in my opinion. That would have probably been better than what we got. Instead, we got stuck with Kevin McCarthy. So think about this. We have a series of people that will sell you out the first chance you get. Time's ticking away on the newest pistol brace ban, and you have until the 31st to either register and comply and be a good little Bundes, or, simply put, don't. Now, there's over 100,000 people that decided that they were going to. To me, those are sellouts. Those are collaborators. And the reason why I say they're sellouts and collaborators is because if there was not anyone that complied with this type of ban, it wouldn't work. And if you don't believe me, look at the cannabis industry. Cannabis came around and legalized marijuana in many states because people simply didn't obey the rule. So they had to find a way to make it legal because there was enough people using this item that made them legalize it. You know, 3 more states in the hopper for that are coming up is what it looks like. There looks like 1 or 2 more states going in the direction of constitutional carry. You know, the highest population of people right now that are buying firearms, and I saw it this last gun show, are women. Why? Because they know that if the ball drops and the rubber meets the road, there's only one person that's going to save them, and that's themselves. The rest of the American people need to come back around to this and understand we're it. You know, you should know that right now. The simple fact that our government now is taking someone like Mike Glover and demonizing him for telling people to prep and be careful and to take care of yourself and to train and learn medical training so that if something happens, you can be your own self-responder, your own first responder. Or that if something happens and the world goes in a very bad, dark place, that you have the option to defend yourself and keep your family whole by making sure they have food, by being able to defend yourself, by community action itself. And that's one thing I can say. I heard a lot of other people at that gun show that were all on the same page as me. There's a lot of people that have woken up and realized that the state has become an enemy combatant. And as soon as we realize that, we can start addressing it. And we're in that place now. You know, Mike Glover got on Glenn Beck's podcast, and he talked about how an FBI agent came up to him and said, hey, man, sorry for putting you on all these bad lists, but I'm a huge fan and I'm part of your group. And I didn't do that just to be part of the FBI to spy on you, is what he said. That's very telling. That means that these people that willingly oppress you realize what's coming down the pipe. The rest of us need to know that too. It's time to stop with the wool over your eyes and looking at things and get off the couch and start being active. There is no way that we're going to win this fight if you're just willing to let the status quo happen. Will we be okay at the end of all this inflation and everything else? I believe our country will. How it survives it at the end, though, that's what I'm worried about. You know, there was a group of people that came on to Tim Cast's Culture War podcast, which is usually Fridays. And it's before he does, it's like after everything else, and all he does is usually, there's really no political speak about it, usually. And he had Lauren Southern and Seamus Coughlin on, and they were talking, basically debriefing about the podcast on Thursday, where the leftist Lance from the Surfs came on, and they were talking about self-defense there. Now, why? Because this is a continued issue. You know, these people that were on in New York that were just on the subway, they were headed to work or whatever else they were doing, and they were attacked by an idiot, a guy that lost his mind. Same thing with those people in Allen, Texas, at the Dallas Mall. You know, these guys just went in there to buy their stuff, to just conduct life as usual. And some idiot, some mindless brainlet went in there and shot them up. What are you going to do? You know, I say it often again, and I'll say it again. Stay strapped or be clapped, or get clapped. It's actually that point in time right now. If you're taking your gun off when you go into a store because you want to comply, what's going to happen if something like this happens? You going to have time to run to your truck and get your gun? What happens if they've hit one of the people in your family or your party while you're at that store or restaurant? You know, just as you carry a firearm, can you stop a bleed? Legitimate question. You know, accidents happen. Can you be your own first responder? You need to be there now. You need to have that training. You need to get first aid training, and you need to be able to execute a long-range shot and a short-range shot with your self-defense gun. Because it's raining, and man, are we getting slacked. The same time this happened, or today, this morning, just this morning, there's a guy in an SUV who killed 7 people. Now, these look like they were illegal migrants, so that I'm guessing this is race-related. But it still states to the problem. It speaks to the problem. What are we going to do about it? You know, mentally deranged people do mentally deranged things. If you cannot conduct your life without getting some sort of revenge because you feel slighted or cheated, you're in the wrong game, period. You're in the wrong mindset. And that's where I think a lot of American people are at right now. After what has happened to us, we all have a lot of trauma after the last 3 years. Hell, they just ended the CDC stuff, and the CDC director is now retiring or resigning and stepping down. Why? Because they know that it's coming. That there are people hunting heads right now for all they did to the American people. And it's time that we start getting some sort of cleansing. And when I was bringing up that podcast, the Culture War podcast, was they were talking about people looking for retribution for not allowing, or the government not doing their job. That there are going to be more people like Kyle Rittenhouse's that come out and stand up and fight. And there are going to be a lot of bodies when they do. Why? Because these people are the ones that took it upon themselves to get trained. These people, I'm not advocating for that behavior. It's the wrong behavior. We're still in that phase where we have to win hearts and minds. Some minds are so corroded and gone, we can't win them. Those other ones we can still talk to. Now, I mentioned before, we need to start trying to get people back to our side. That only goes so far. There are some that you can't, and I realize that. I'm not willing to give up on a lot of people because there's a lot of smart people that don't just regurgitate talking points. You know, I've talked about those uber liberal friends I have. There's a lot of them that are critical thinkers. There's one or two of them that are just mindless brainlets that will only regurgitate talking points, and they're usually around diversity, equity, and inclusion that don't think about what that means. You know, all this trans crap that's happening right now is less of a threat to me than what the government's doing. And I say that because the trans people are just doing their thing. Whether or not they win, that's on them. I will say I have a problem with them trying to go after kids because kids are innocent. They need to be protected. That's what the whole idea of being a parent is. It's to protect your kids the best you can. To that end, what are you going to do? You know, there's a lot of dads that would go fight for their kids and their wives. That's great. Well, you need to fight for them all the time, because this issue isn't going away, and it's just getting worse. They're going after it. Biden's already called for banning all assault weapons, quote-unquote assault weapons. I can tell you at the gun show, that's what was selling. AR-15s were the top seller, and handguns, hands down. You know, I saw guys walk in. I saw one guy walk in with 2 different Kalashnikovs. And the reason why I recognize the Kalashnikovs because there wasn't a lot there, and I'm a Kalashnikov aficionado. So much so that some of these guys that know me at the gun shows were saying, "Hey, AK dude," or "Hey, AK operator," or "Have you done the push-ups like Robsky does, or like the Spetsnaz does on their AK?" Not quite, not yet. I am still too heavy in my personal opinion to where I don't want to risk using my Kalashnikov for that. I'm sure it would be fine. But the reason why I bring up the Kalashnikov stuff was that set people up to make them look and see what this guy was carrying around. Okay? For me, I knew what it was. First one he walked around with was a Bulgy, a Bulgarian Kalashnikov. The second one he walked around with was a Romanian RPK. Now, everybody was fawning over the RPK because they haven't seen them. I've shot them. There's no big deal. You know? That's what we need to happen. And what I mean by that is being so desensitized to firearms that people see them, but they recognize if this person's a threat or not. You know, if you're at a mall and some guy walks in armor and a pistol or a rifle, now's the time for action. Now's the time to either be a good witness and get the hell out of Dodge, or to stand up and fight. Because in reality, some states like New Mexico, that is perfectly legal to walk around in. So you need to assess that accordingly. Was this done as a threat? Was this done as a protest? Was this done as to scare everybody? Or was this person actually acting or getting ready to act? Those of you that are willing to try to poke the bear by wearing armor in public and carrying a long gun and then walking into a store or restaurant, be prepared. Because there's going to be people like me that are going to have to make a really quick snap decision. And depending upon their mindset, they're going to act. And you may end up dead. You know, the simple fact is, there's enough people running around shooting up things because they're mentally unstable that people like me are going to have to make that snap decision, because we're there to save our family, myself, and anyone else around me. So I'm telling you, that's probably not the way you want to go. That's how you train. That's how you do other things. Open carry your pistol. In New Mexico, it's legal. If you're over the age of 19, I believe that you can carry a pistol. I don't know how you're going to get a pistol when you're 19, but good luck. But you can open carry in New Mexico, and I'm proud of that. You know, when I mean my audience, most of my audience is in New Mexico. I live in New Mexico. It's a beautiful state. It's just raised by idiots. It's being run by idiots, I should say. And we need to change that. We are a heartbeat away. You know, I used to laugh at the boomers and all these guys that would say we're one election away from losing our country. We really are this time. This next election cycle will determine a lot when it comes to personal freedoms and personal property rights. And whether you agree with it or not, it's the fact. Property rights are a thing. They have been forever. And if you think that someone defending their own personal property, their own livelihood, their own life, because they don't conform to your ideas that they should be a victim first, and then try to use the legal system accordingly. You know, I'm sorry. It's still better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. And yeah, you know what? I'm willing, more than willing, to make sure that I'm around for that. If you're one of these jerks that goes into a building that I'm in and you're starting to shoot up stuff, expect to be countered. Now, I may not be successful, but damn it, I'm going to give it my college try. I'm going to do everything I can in my ability to stop you, because it's wrong. It's reprehensible. And the longer we allow the public allows this stuff to happen, the government will go ahead and trounce on us. So we have to stand up. We have to show there's more of us than there are of them. And it's time we stand up and say, no more bullcrap. This is bullshit, and they know it. And to sit there and have AOC come on and say that this man killed this man, purposely killed him. This was first-degree murder in her mind. This is an unfortunate accident as I see it. One, where was the subway cops to stop this guy from being doing what he was doing? I don't mean the guy that ended up choking him out. I mean the guy that was slapping the hell out of this woman or assaulting her or harassing her, however this whole thing started. Where were the subway cops to stop that? Nowhere. So this man took it upon himself to save his fellow person. And that's how it should be. You know, humanity is a great thing. And to push this off and say, go ahead, kill him, that's not my deal. You know, what they're doing in those leftist cities is making people like me second guess it. You know, you guys keep voting for this stuff, let it happen. That's why New Mexico, 3/4 of it is not that way. We can't let that stuff happening in Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and Las Cruces trickle down to the rest of us. You know, Hobbs is getting close to being like those other places. It's a war zone. And the only way this stops is when the American people say enough's enough and they start defending themselves. Maybe you call that vigilante justice. I call it just people deciding they've had enough. And they've realized that they cannot wait for the state to defend them in any way. Like, share, subscribe, be great.